The wind carried a sharp smell of smoke and decay across the edge of the village as Zuri walked down the narrow, beaten path. Her feet crunched over bits of glass and twisted tin, the kind that caught the dying sunlight and sparkled cruelly. It had been years since she had last seen her father. Years since she had even spoken his name aloud. Yet here she was, drawn back by something she couldn't explain. A thread of fate pulling her toward a place she once swore she'd never return to. The village dump stretched before her like an open wound, and right in the middle of it sat a figure she almost didn't recognize. Her father, Mosey. The man who had spent her childhood behind walls of silence and stern eyes. Only now he looked fragile, almost broken. As she moved closer, her heart pounded with disbelief. Her father was sitting among heaps of discarded things. Old clothes, broken frames, empty cans, and in his arms he cradled a baby. Small, trembling, wrapped in bits of torn cloth barely covering its tiny body. The sight hit her harder than any slap or shout ever could. That same man who had never hugged her, never softened his voice for her, was now holding someone else's child with a tenderness she'd never seen. Zuri froze. For a moment she couldn't move. Her breath caught in her throat, torn between fury and sorrow. Memories crashed over her, nights she'd begged for attention, for love, and received nothing but silence. The empty kitchen table on birthdays, the stiff look of disapproval whenever she dared to dream for something warm or kind. And now this small bundle in his arms. Proof, she thought bitterly, of another secret, another betrayal, but she couldn't look away. Mosey's hands trembled as he tried to comfort the crying baby, mumbling something too soft for her to hear. Shame sat heavy on his wrinkled face, deeper than the lines carved by years of sun and labor. His eyes stayed on the ground, unable or unwilling to meet hers. The wind picked up, lifting dust and scraps of paper around them. The whole world seemed to spin in slow motion. The baby's sobs cut through the air like knives, slicing open the old wounds between father and daughter. Zuri's heart twisted. Rage boiled up, the kind that had been building all her life. Rage that whispered, "He never looked at you this way, never cared for you this way." But behind that living flame of anger came something else. A quiet ache that pressed deep in her chest. The child was innocent, soft, helpless. Just like she once had been when her father's love seemed too distant to reach. Her eyes filled with tears. She didn't cry for Mosey, not for the man before her. She cried for the little one who hadn't even learned what loss was but was already wrapped in it. She cried for the life starting and breaking in the same breath. Mosey tried to speak, but his voice cracked, the words falling apart before they fully formed. He only adjusted the baby higher against his chest, as if trying to shield a truth he couldn't bear to tell. Zuri stepped closer, and the smell of rot and sweat and damp plastic washed over her, pulling her back to another night long ago, when her father had stumbled home drunk, his breath thick with liquor, his eyes glassy with avoidance. She had asked something simple, maybe just why, and he had turned away as if she were a ghost. Now, standing before him again, she found her voice trembling with every word. "Why are you here?" But Mosey said nothing. Only the baby's weak crying answered. He held the child tighter, his arms curling protectively, his silence screaming more loudly than any confession. Shame, fear, and years of hidden regret hung between them. Zuri's chest ached. Her mind flickered through old pictures. Her father's absence from school events, his empty chair at her 15th birthday, the times he'd simply turned his face away when she asked to be seen. Every memory rose up like smoke, choking her. And there he was, the same man, giving to a stranger's baby what he never gave his own blood. Her anger and pain tangled together. She wanted to shout, to seize the truth from him, to tear apart whatever wall stood between them. But the sound of that baby's sobs stopped her. The small, shaking breaths mirrored her own past so perfectly it was unbearable. It was as though God himself had placed a mirror before them, showing how cruelty, once born, keeps repeating until someone dares to stop it. The wind roared louder. Garbage rustled, dust stung her skin. Everything around them felt like judgment, or heaven's strange way of offering an unfinished redemption. Zuri didn't know which. She only knew that fate had finally cornered them, not in a home filled with laughter, but in this wasteland where the unwanted were thrown aside. And there they stood, the father who had discarded his daughter, and the child who had already been discarded by the world. It struck Zuri harder than anything she'd felt before. Life repeating itself in cruel circles. Someone had to break it. She closed her eyes, torn in two. Part of her wanted to walk away, to leave him and his secrets among the ruins. But another part of her wanted to reach for the baby, to cradle that fragile life so it would never grow cold with the same loneliness she had known. Mosey finally raised his head. His eyes, wet and hollow, met Zuri's. There was no anger left there, no heavy pride, only pleading, only pain, and something deeper still. A wish for forgiveness he couldn't say aloud. Zuri's breath caught. For the first time she saw not a monster, but a man drowning in his own regret. The tension between them broke just enough for her heart to understand that whatever truth hid beneath this moment would change everything. The baby's cries grew sharper, echoing through the metal and dirt. A sound that seemed to come from another time. The sound of every wound that had ever gone unanswered. As the noise settled into the wind, Zuri saw her past spilling out everywhere around her. The nights waiting by the window in her blue dress for a father who never came. The small cornmeal cake burning low while her mother whispered, "He'll come soon, my child." The way she learned that silence can cut deeper than cruelty. She remembered asking to dance for him at school, hearing only the clatter of his departing boots. She remembered falling sick and watching her mother pray while Mosey walked out of the room without a word. Each memory folded into the next until the years between then and now vanished. And there, in the stinking air, the truth pressed against her chest. Nothing hurt more than indifference. Nothing leaves deeper scars than being unseen. Now, that same indifference stood before her, holding an innocent life in trembling hands. Her tears came hot and fast, but she turned her face aside. Pride held her upright even as sorrow melted her heart. She could not yet forgive him, but she could no longer hate him completely either. Something inside her shifted. The baby stirred, its tiny fingers reaching into the air between them, a space heavy with the weight of years and unspoken things. Zuri felt something fragile break open in her, an old wound, yes, but also a beginning. The dump around them buzzed with flies and whispers, the sky dim with smoke, and still, for the first time, Zuri saw her father not as the man who had ruined her childhood, but as one trying, too late maybe, to make peace. The cries of the baby rose again, echoing through the junk and shattered glass, a cry that sounded like grief itself reaching out from the depths of the earth. It was as if the land, the wind, and the garbage all wanted to remind her of what had been lost. Her reunion with Mosey wasn't just a present-day shock. It was a doorway flung open to a past full of scars. Memories she had sworn were buried, now flooding back with the force of a storm. Zuri took a deep breath, but the air smelled of smoke, rot, and memory. She remembered the first time she understood that her father wasn't like the others. She was still a little girl, sitting on the mud doorstep, waiting for Mosey to come home for dinner. She had helped her mother prepare a simple stew of corn and leaves, hoping it might make him smile. He arrived late, exhausted, with a hardened look. He didn't even glance at his daughter, ate in silence, stood up, and left without a word. That night, Zuri's heart learned to grow used to absence. The memories came in fragments. Her birthday, when she waited in a blue dress, staring out the window, certain her father would come home early with a gift, however small. Time passed. The candle melted alone over a makeshift cornmeal cake, and he never came. Her mother tried to smile, but Zuri knew that emptiness couldn't be filled. That's when she discovered life's promises could be broken without explanation. She remembered the moments she dared to ask for affection. "Dad, can I sit next to you?" He'd answer only with a hard stare, as if scolding her for an invisible crime. "Dad, will you come see me dance at school?" He'd change the subject, say he had work to do, that the fields wouldn't wait. There was never a word of encouragement, never a hug in public. For Mosey, tenderness seemed like a mistake, a weakness no man could afford. And now, holding a baby in his arms, Mosey was surrounded by everything he'd always denied. That's what tore Zuri apart. How could he protect an abandoned child when he'd never protected his own daughter? Her tears came hot, not just because of the scene in front of her, but because of the life behind her. The weight of the past sat like a stone on her chest. Zuri couldn't separate what she saw from what she remembered. The trembling baby in front of her was a reflection of hers, of small, starved for affection. Lost inside a house where her voice had no space. She remembered the time she fell sick with a high fever. Her mother ran to her, placed wet cloths on her forehead, whispered prayers through the night. Mosey, on the other hand, stayed silent. He came and went from the room without a word, as if his daughter's illness were just an inconvenient interruption to his routine. That absence marked Zuri more than any harsh word. She learned that indifference could kill too slowly, like poison dripping into the water of everyday life. And there, in that garbage dump, that indifference took shape. She saw in the baby the same thing she had always been, forgotten, pushed aside as if she had no place in the world. Zuri's eyes brimmed with tears, but she didn't want her father to see. Pride and pain were tangled within her. Her heart wanted to demand, to scream, to accuse. But another voice echoed inside her, a voice from long ago, maybe even her late mother's, saying, "Anger doesn't heal my child. It only deepens the emptiness." Mosey remained silent, head bowed, as if he carried not only the weight of the baby, but also the ghosts of his own story. Zuri noticed that he trembled, and it wasn't just from holding the child. There was a broken man standing there, unsure how to gather the pieces of what he had shattered. But for Zuri, the pain was stronger. The past wasn't just memory. It was an open wound. Every time she looked at the baby, she saw herself small and overlooked. The father who had judged her so harshly now cradled an innocent child, and within her, a question kept growing. Why not me? The wind blew again, stirring up dust around them. It was as if fate itself wanted to blend the past and the present so that nothing would be forgotten. Zuri realized this reunion with her father wasn't just about the child. It was about herself, her stolen childhood, all the tears shed behind closed doors. The weight of the past stood between them, invisible but suffocating. And Zuri knew that this story wouldn't just be about a baby found in the trash. It would be about the emotional garbage they'd both carried for years, piled up in silences, rejections, and wounds never spoken aloud. The wind that blew through the dumps seemed to want to carry away the secrets hanging in the air. But there are some things that neither time nor silence can hide. Zuri looked at her father with suspicion and anger. The baby's cries, wrapped in filthy rags, broke her heart. But the sight of Mosey holding that child with such care-nighted memories of her own childhood. The weight of the past had already scarred her. But now a deeper mystery was beginning to grow inside her. Who was this baby? And why was her father so cold and distant, holding him as if he were his own flesh and blood? Zuri took a deep breath, trying to contain the fury burning in her chest. She stepped closer until the sour scent of spoiled milk and the baby's sweat mixed with the smell of dirt and rot all around. Them. She looked at the wrinkled little face and the fragile body and felt that this child's life was hanging by a thread. She turned to gaze to Mosey and asked firmly, "Whose child is this, father?" Mosey remained silent. His eyes avoided hers. The man who had always met her with sternness now seemed to hide behind the innocence of the baby. With every second of silence, Zuri's heart closed further like a door that had already been slammed shut too many times. "Speak," she demanded, her voice echoing like an open wound. "Don't play with me. Not after everything you've put me through." Mosey sighed, his chest rising and falling with weight. "Finally," he murmured, "I found this child here, Zura thrown away like he was nothing." His words struck like thunder. Zuri looked around, saw the piles of garbage, vultures circling above, flies buzzing. She tried to imagine a mother leaving her own child in a place like this. Her heart ached, but at the same time, doubt throbbed inside her. Was her father telling the truth, or was this just another story to cover up something more shameful? Zuri crossed her arms, unable to come any closer. The memory of all the times Mosey had hidden his feelings, his mistakes, pressed heavily on her. It wasn't easy to believe him now, not when her memories screamed that he had never told the truth about anything. "You found him," she repeated with bitter irony. "Or did you bring him from somewhere you're too afraid to confess?" Silence fell between them again. The baby stirred, whimpering as if he too felt the weight of accusation. Mosey lowered his eyes and gently stroked the baby's head with a tenderness Zuri had never known. That simple gesture, so soft and filled with care, pierced her like a blade. She thought of all the stories whispered in the village, in kitchens and crowded markets. Respected men hiding children born outside their marriages. Women cast aside, babies left to fend for themselves. And suddenly, her father's image fit perfectly into that shameful portrait. Rage boiled inside her. "So that's it," she said through clenched teeth. "After denying me love, after treating me like a burden, you show up here with a baby in your arms, and I'm supposed to believe you just found him." Mosey lifted his head for a moment. His eyes, glistening with tears, met hers. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He only shook his head slowly, as if confirming a truth too heavy to say aloud. Zuri felt a knot form in her throat. Her heart wanted to believe there was innocence in this, that maybe her father had truly acted out of compassion. But her mind, shaped by years of rejection and silence, couldn't accept it. To her, Mosey had always been a man full of secrets, and this baby could only be one more. The secret lingered in the air and touched, but far too heavy to ignore. The baby wasn't just an abandoned child. He was a symbol of everything Zuri still didn't know about her own father, and inside her the certainty grew. Whatever the truth was, it wouldn't stay buried for long. The cold night wind began to sweep through the garbage dump, bringing with it a strange silence broken only by the faint crying of the child. Zuri stood still before her father, arms crossed, heart tight. What he had said wasn't enough. Finding a baby thrown in the trash sounded like a story too impossible to believe, especially coming from Mosey, a man who had always lived surrounded by secrets, who had never known how to open his heart, not even to his own daughter. With every second of silence, Zuri's mind would darker and darker possibilities. One thought burned like fire. What if that baby really was her father's child? A consequence of a hidden life. A mistake he was now trying to cover up. Whispers from the village echoed back in her mind. She remembered hearing even as a child. Malicious stories about Mossy, rumors that he was stern at home, but not nearly as strict with women outside. Back then, Zuri had dismissed such gossip. But now, faced with a baby, every word seemed to take on shape. "This baby," Zuri began, her voice choked but steady. "Did you really find him? Or is he your own blood?" Father Mosey's gaze faltered. He tried to compose himself, straightened his shoulders, but couldn't bring himself to look his daughter in the eye. And in that moment, his hesitation was all it took for Zuri to feel the wound cut deeper. "I knew it," she muttered, more to herself than to him. "I knew one day you'd bring shame to this family." That the baby let out a sob in his arms, as if he could understand the weight of her words. Mosey pulled the child closer to his chest and shut his eyes. There were tears there, but his silence spoke louder. Zuri took a few steps back. Inside her, the old hurt was morphing into cruel suspicion. Her father had never defended her from the village's judgment, had never protected her from the harsh stays, never stood up for her. Now maybe he was the one being judged, and part of her felt it was only fair. The images in her mind turned bitter. Neighbors whispering in market aisles, men laughing over drinks, children pointing at their family. Old Mosey had a child out of wedlock, they'd say. And as always, it would be the daughter left to carry the greater shame. "How many times, father?" she asked, her voice lower now but still sharp as a blade. "How many times did you look me in the eye and judge me while hiding your own sins?" His silence was the most painful answer of all. No defense, no denial, just the heavy weight of guilt he seemed to carry, but could not bring himself to confess. Zuri's heartened with every breath. The memories of a harsh childhood, years of absence and indifference, now mingled with the suspicion that her father had always led a secret life. A life where she had no place. In that moment, Zuri felt small again. Not just the rejected daughter of a cold father, but now also the woman forced to carry the shame of someone else's secret. Her sorrow swelled like a shadow, and the space for compassion shrank inside her. She took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. Her suspicion was no longer just a passing thought. It was a bleeding wound fed by Mosey's heavy silence. The baby cried again, louder this time, as if protesting against being caught in the middle of a voiceless storm. Zuri looked at the child and felt anger not at him, but at the whole situation. To her, the baby was no longer just innocent. He had become a living reminder that her father may have committed an unforgivable wrong. "If you won't tell me the truth," she said, her voice trembling but resolute, "then I'll find it out myself." Mosey looked up for a moment, and in his eyes was a deep sorrow, but still he said nothing. He only shook his head slowly, like a man who knows he carries a burden too heavy to explain in a few words. Zuri's heart turned to stone. Any trust that might have begun to form shattered in that instant. In its place, an invisible wall rose built. From old wounds, rejection, and doubt. She no longer saw her father as just an aging, remorseful man. She saw him as someone hiding sins, as someone who may have dragged their family into disgrace. The silence of the dump became suffocating, and the daughter's suspicions settled like a sentence until the truth came to light. She would no longer see him as her father, but as a stranger. The sun had barely risen, and already the village was murmuring. Words spread faster than the wind, laced with malice, curiosity, and venom. There wasn't a soul who didn't comment. Mosey showed up with a baby in his arms. Taken from the dump, that was how the sharp tongues told it, without a shred of concern for the family's pain or the truth that had yet to be revealed. The women gathered by the well stirred their buckets with whispers. Some said it was an act of kindness, that maybe God had touched old Mosey's heart to rescue a forsaken life. Others, harsher, laughed with scorn. "Kindness, don't be fooled. That baby is his. He just didn't have the guts to admit it before." Their laughter sounded like stones thrown at a house already cracking at the market. The men didn't miss a chance to mock. "Look at Mosey, always with that grim face, judging everyone. And now he shows up with a new kid. Who'd have thought?" The village judge became the accused. The joke sparked laughter but cast a dark shadow over his name. Zuri heard it all from a distance, and each word pierced her chest like a needle. She felt humiliated not only by her father, but by sharing his blood. What hurt the most was seeing that no one cared about the baby. The child crying from hunger and cold was nothing more than an excuse to judge Mosey. To the village, the child's innocence didn't matter, only the scandal. The baby had become a symbol of shame, not of hope. And it was this collective gaze that wounded Zuri most deeply. Some neighbors began to avoid them. When Mosey walked through the streets with the baby, doors shut quietly. Eyes turned away, but the whispers didn't stop. At other times, people stared openly with disgust. "Isn't that old man ashamed?" raised his daughter with an iron fist. And now this, even children laughing repeated what they'd heard from their parents. "It's the baby from the trash." Zuri walked with her head held high, but inside she felt crushed. With every step, it felt like all lies were on her. The rejection and silence of her childhood were now entangled with public humiliation. She didn't know whether to feel anger toward Mosey for putting her in this position, or toward the village, which always seemed eager to destroy someone's name. One morning, while gathering firewood, Zuri overheard two women talking behind a fence. Of course, that baby's his. Who else would go into the dump to pick up a child? Exactly. And now the daughter has to swallow her shame. That's what she gets for coming back here. Their words cut like knives. Zuri froze, took a deep breath, but couldn't stop the tears that came without warning. She returned home with a heavy heart, unsure whether to confront her father again or simply vanish from that place. Meanwhile, Mosey remained silent. He didn't respond to the accusations, didn't defend himself against the laughter, didn't retaliate against the insults. He walked with his head low, as if accepting every stone thrown his way. But this posture only fueled Zuri's fury. "Why won't you speak?" She confronted him one night, voice trembling. "They're laughing at you." "They're laughing at me, and you just take it in silence." Mosey gently stroked the baby's head, who was fast asleep, and murmured, "Sometimes silence is the only answer a man has left." Zuri couldn't accept that. To her, silence wasn't dignity. It was cowardice. And every time her father said nothing, her suspicion grew deeper. The villagers' judgment wasn't made of words alone. It was in the stares, the shut doors, the subtle exclusion. Slowly, Mosey and Zuri were becoming strangers in their own community. The baby who should have been a symbol of life was treated like a curse. And in Zuri's heart, sorrow blended with shame. She had already borne the weight of growing up without love. Now she carried the burden of a reputation stained by unspoken truths. With each whisper, each mocking laugh, the daughter drifted further from her father. She no longer saw him only as Aemon bowed by guilt, but as the source of all the humiliation she now endured. And though she didn't have the courage to say it aloud, one question burned inside her. How many more secrets still hid behind that silence? The weight of the village whispers gave no rest. Zuri could no longer step outside without feeling the eyes piercing her skin like daggers. The baby, now living under her roof, was the constant target of speculation and accusation. No one cared about the truth. They only wanted to feed the fire of scandal. And what consumed her most was Mosey's silence. He remained steady, but quiet, as if he accepted his sentence without even trying to defend himself. To Zuri, that silence was unbearable. If he didn't have the courage to speak, then she would find the answers herself. Restlessness grew inside her like a drum that refused to stop beating. At night, lying on her mat, Zuri could barely sleep. The baby's soft sobs beside her seemed to call out not only to her as a daughter or an aunt, but as a witness to a truth still buried. In her heart, she made a decision. She would investigate no matter the cost. The next day, while at the market, she seized her chance to dig. She approached an elderly neighbor, Mama Abeni, always known for keeping an eye on the village's comings and goings. Zuri eased into the conversation but quickly reached her point. "Have you heard of any young girl who's gone missing lately?" Abeni narrowed her eyes and replied in a hushed voice, as if afraid the walls might hear. "Yes, they say. Our niece disappeared. A young girl ashamed, belly growing by the day. Some say she was thrown out of the house. Others that she ran away on her own. No one's seen her since." Zuri's heart pounded. A thread of suspicion was turning into a trail. It might have been coincidence, but deep inside she felt the connection was clear. A pregnant girl who vanished and a baby found in the dump dot. She thanked Abeni and kept walking, but her mind was racing. On her way home, she passed by another neighbor's door, known for loving gossip. Finding casualness, she stopped to talk. "I heard a girl went missing." Zuri said, "Do you know anything about that?" Saad didn't waste the opportunity. "Oh, I do. It was Yara's daughter, you know, the one who never could control her household. The girl got involved way too early, ended up pregnant, and brought shame on the family. Her father wanted nothing to do with it, so he sent her away. No one's seen her since. Some say she was spotted near the river week, barely able to stand." Saad's words hit Zuri like stones. She couldn't hide the tremble in her voice and her baby. Saad gave a bitter laugh. "Who knows? Maybe it died with her. Or maybe it's the one your father brought home." Zuri's blood ran cold. She went home without saying another word. But the conversation echoed in her mind. The more she thought, the stronger the suspicion became. The baby, now asleep in her arms, might be the result of that tragedy. In the following days, Zuri quietly continued her investigation. She spoke with more people, gathered fragments of stories. Some said they heard a baby crying near the road. Others claimed to have seen a shadowy figure running at night, carrying something in her arms. With each new piece, the picture grew clearer. A desperate young woman, rejected by her family, wandering aimlessly until pain and despair led her to abandon the baby in the garbage. Zor's heart burned. Part of her felt deep compassion for the missing girl. Another part twisted with resentment, asking why her father had told her nothing. Why he had let the whole village judge them without a word. If he knew something, why didn't he speak? Why let everyone believe the baby was his shame? One quiet night, while rocking the child in her arms, Zira looked at Mosey and said firmly, "I'm going to uncover the whole truth, even if I have to dig up every corner of this village." Mosey stayed quiet. He only lowered his eyes as always, but on his face was a shadow of pain that Zuri still couldn't quite decipher. Her search wasn't only about the baby anymore. It was about herself, her right not to carry the weight of silence and lies any longer. She knew the truth would come sooner or later, and when it did, neither she nor Mosey nor anyone in the village would ever be the same. The silence inside the mud house was nearly suffocating. Outside the village still buzzed, spreading suspicions and accusations like wildfire through dry grass. But within those four walls, the tension wasn't born from the voices of others. It was built from blood, from history, from pain Long H held in Ziri, paced back and forth, her heart pounding like a war drum. The baby slept in the corner wrapped in clean cloth she had prepared herself. Mosey sat on the wooden bench, head bowed as if he didn't have the strength to bear the weight of his own body. She watched him, and the longer he remained silent, the more her anger swelled inside. She couldn't take it anymore. Everyone in the village talked, invented accused, and inside her home, there was only silence, a silence that suffocated her more than the whispers in the street. It was as if Mosey would rather be stoned in the town square than reveal what truly happened. "Enough, father." Zuri's voice echoed sharply, breaking the silence. "I can't stand this shadow game anymore. Tell me whose child this is." Mosey slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red, tired. He tried to speak, but no words came out. Zuri stepped closer. Her face hardened. "Don't you see what you're doing to me? The whole village is accusing us, and I'm carrying the shame that isn't even mine." Tears began to stream down her cheeks, but her voice held firm. "I was raised with harshness, with an iron hand, never a gesture of kindness. And now, when I finally need answers, you go silent." Mosey ran his hands over his wrinkled face, as if trying to wipe away years of silence. He took a deep breath, and for the first time, his voice came out steady, but heavy with sorrow. "This child is not mine, Zuri." She let out a bitter laugh, one with no joy. "Then whose is it?" "The wind's, the earth's. Don't lie to me, father. I saw the way you hold him, saw the shame in your eyes. This child has a story, and you're part of it." The old man trembled. His body looked ready to collapse. The tears he'd held back finally escaped. Musi, the man Zuri had always known as Stone, was now weeping before her. "It's true," he said, voice breaking. "There is a story, but it's not what you think." Zuri's heart pounded faster. For a moment she wanted to back away, but her hunger for truth was stronger. "Then tell me," she cried, "for the first time in your life. Speak to me like a father." Mosey closed his eyes for a long moment, as if drawing strength from the deepest part of himself. Then, in a whisper of a voice, he revealed, "This child is the daughter of your Aunt Io's daughter, your cousin Zulaka." The ground felt like it disappeared beneath Zuri's feet. She remembered Zula caught a girl who always smiled at family gatherings, but who had vanished from conversation far too soon. She remembered how her mother used to whisper about her, saying she had shamed the family, but never offering details. Now the missing piece finally fit. She murmured in disbelief. She disappeared. "They said she ran away." Mosey nodded, tears streaming freely down his face. "She didn't run. Zuri, she was cast out, pregnant, too young, and the family wouldn't forgive her. She wandered alone, rejected until she reached this place and gave birth by herself in misery. I found her too late. She had no strength left. Only the baby was still breathing." The words struck Zuri's heart like stones, and not in her throat, left her speechless. She felt rage, grief, and compassion twist together inside her in a way she couldn't explain. The baby now sleeping in her home wasn't just a symbol of the village's shame. He was her own family, the flesh of her cousin's flesh. She stepped closer to Mosey, eyes brimming with tears. "Then why didn't you tell me before? Why did you let them laugh at us, point fingers at me?" Mosey lifted his eyes. and in them was a pain so deep it nearly broke her. Because I failed, Zuri. I failed her just as I failed you. I wasn't there when I should have been. When I found her, all I could save was this child, and I stayed silent because the shame was bigger than my courage. Zuri's tears fell freely now. For the first time, she saw her father stripped of his hardened mask. He was no longer the unbreakable man she had feared. He was only a broken man guilty, crying before his daughter. What had begun as a confrontation fueled by rage had become a revelation. The secret had finally been torn open, and though it hurt, it also marked the beginning of a truth powerful enough to change everything. Night fell heavy over the village, and the tiny flame of the oil lamp barely kept the shadows from stretching across the mud walls. Zuri stood, heart pounding as if it were trying to burst from her chest. Her father's broken sobs still echoed in her mind, and the words she had heard felt too painful to accept. The baby wasn't just an abandoned child. He was family. Zulika's son, her lost cousin's child. But Mosey's revelation wasn't enough. Zira could feel if there was more, and she demanded it. "Tell me, father. Don't hide anything from me this time." Her voice came out steady, though heavy with pain. "I want to know what happened to Zulika." Mosey took a deep breath like a man about to dive into icy water. He rubbed his time-worn face with trembling hands and closed his eyes for a moment before letting the words finally escape. "Your cousin," he began, voice low, almost a whisper. "She had no one to defend her. When the family found out she was pregnant, your aunt turned her back on her. Her husband, your Uncle Ao, said he wouldn't raise a daughter who brought dishonor into their home. Her brother called her a disgrace. No one listened. She was cast out with nothing but a bundle of clothes and a growing belly." Zuri felt her legs go weak. The image of Zulako, so young, so full of light, now returned to her, twisted by pain. A lost girl wandering without direction, rejected by her own blood. "She came home, Zuri," Mosey's voice broke. "One day she showed up at my door, eyes full of tears. She begged for shelter, asked only that I speak for her with the family, and I turned her away. I told her to stay out of others' problems, that I couldn't carry more burdens." He stopped and the tears fell down his lined face. That was the greatest sin of my life. Zuri's heart froze. Her father, the man who had raised her with severity and demanded loyalty and honor, had been complicit in rejection. He had not only failed as a father, but as an uncle, as a man, as a human being. Mosey continued sobbing. "She vanished after that. For months I heard nothing until that cursed night. I went to the dump looking for old wood to burn. That's when I heard the crying. I followed the sound and I found her collapsed, weak, barely breathing. The baby beside her wrapped in rags. Zuri covered her mouth, trying to stifle a sob. And her, she asked, barely able to speak." Mosey shut his eyes as if the memory still haunted him. "I tried to wake her. I called her name, but it was too late. Her body was cold, Zuri. She gave birth alone in filth and silence, without a hand to hold hers, without a voice to comfort her. Life left her there among scraps and flies like she was just another piece of trash." Silence fell over the house like a stone. Zuri could no longer hold back. She wept freely, tears flowing like a river, not only for herself, but for generations of pain. Zulaka hadn't just died. She had been slowly killed by rejection, by pride, by the weight of shame. And now the baby was all that was left at life, snatched from death, already marked by abandonment from the moment of birth. Zuri collapsed to her knees, the weight of the truth pressing on her chest. Her father's confession wrapped around her like chains, trapping her between anger and compassion. Anger for knowing he had failed, that he could have saved Zuika if only he had reached out. Compassion because in his broken cries she saw a man shattered by his own mistakes. "Why, father?" she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Why didn't you take her in? Why did you treat her with the same harshness you used on me?" Mosey didn't lift his head. The weight of his shame crushed him. "Because I was blind, Zuri. I believed honor was more important than love. And that blindness, it killed your cousin." He took a deep breath, but his voice still trembled. "Now all I can do is try to save what's left of her. At that moment, the baby began to cry in the corner, as if he too could feel the weight of everything that had been spoken. Zuri rushed to him, lifting him into her arms, holding him close. She felt the warmth of his tiny body against her chest. And in the midst of all the pain, she felt something else flicker inside her. A spark of life. The cruel truth now stood before her, naked and undeniable. This baby wasn't just a mystery solved. He was living testimony to a terrible injustice. Proof that rejection can kill more surely than hunger. Zuri knew nothing could bring Zuika back. But maybe, just maybe, she could stop history from repeating itself. The revelation about Zuika never left Zuri's mind. In the days that followed, the memory of her cousin's face so vibrant in the past, now erased by the cruelty of fate, blended with the fragile cries of the baby who slept on her mat. When she looked at him, she didn't just see an innocent child. She saw the continuation of a life that had been unjustly taken. What once felt like a burden was slowly taking the shape of a mission. Her father's words still echoed. She came to me and I turned her away. That line burned inside Zuri like a hot iron. The anger she felt toward Mosey hadn't disappeared, but it was beginning to transform. For the first time, she saw that her father wasn't just a cold and harsh man, but also a human being crushed under the weight of his own failures. Watching him cry, hearing him confess his guilt that had opened a small crack in her heart, just enough space for something new to begin. One morning when the baby cried from hunger, Zuri rose before her father. She prepared a thin porridge and offered it patiently, holding his fragile head with care. As she watched his tiny mouth, searching for nourishment, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. A deep urge to protect, to care, to make sure pain would not repeat itself. While she rocked the baby, tears streamed down her cheeks uncontrollably. "You won't go through what I went through," she whispered, almost like a vow. "Nor what your mother suffered." Her father watched from a distance, sitting silently. There were no words between them, but something passed in the space between their gazes. Mosey saw in that small gesture something he had never expected, a chance for redemption. Not through him, but through her. As the days went by, Zuri began to feel a deeper shift within herself. When she went to fetch water, she carried the baby with her, facing the villagers' stares head before. Those looks had cut like blades. Now though they still hurt, they no longer made her bow her head. Shame was slowly giving way to something else. Dignity. It wasn't easy, but with each step she felt she was rebuilding her own identity. At night, when silence returned to the house, Zuri remembered her childhood. The memories of her father's absence still stung. But now she could also see that there had been more than cruelty in their story. There had been ignorance, inherited hardness, men who mistook silence for strength, honor for emotional distance, and somehow understanding this helped her realize she didn't have to repeat the cycle. One of those nights, Zuri sat beside her father, the baby asleep between them. The silence was heavy, but different now. It was no longer made only of old wounds, but also of unspoken possibility. "Father," she said, breaking the quiet, "I still feel anger. I still feel pain. But when I look at this child, I see that God is giving us a chance to do things differently." Mosey didn't answer right away. His eyes filled with tears, and Hess simply nodded. For him, hearing that from his daughter was more than words. It was a sign that the wall between them was beginning to crack. Zuri, who had returned to the village, burdened only by longing and rejection, now found herself standing at the edge of something new. The baby was more than just family. He was a symbol of possible redemption, a life that could blossom. Even after being pulled from the ashes, the change in her heart hadn't come like a lightning bolt. It was slow, steady like the sun rising after a long dark night. With each gesture of care, each cry soothed, each quiet look shared with her father, Zuri felt she was not only saving the baby, but saving herself. And deep down, she knew this child would be the bridge that finally connected what had long been divided. Father and daughter so distant were starting to draw near again, not through grand words, but through the quiet shared promise to never let history repeat itself. Time in the village seemed to pass slowly, but inside the little mud house, the days were filling with meaning. The baby, who had once arrived as a burden and a symbol of shame, was now cared for by steady hands and a renewed heart. Zuri, who had returned home as a wounded daughter, was now discovering within herself the strength of an improvised mother. And in that quiet process of surrender, a gesture was born, one that would change everything. One clear morning, as the sun lazily rose behind the mountains, Zuri woke before the baby. She sat beside the mat and watched his tiny face, so fragile and yet so full of promise. She ran her fingers gently across his forehead, and there in silence a decision ripened inside her. It wasn't just compassion. It wasn't just blood. It was choice. The choice to protect, to love, to not continue the chain of rejection that had marked her family. When Mosey got up, he saw his daughter sitting with the child in her arms. The first rays of light lit her tear-filled eyes. He said nothing at first, just stood there, unsure if he should come closer. But she broke the silence. "Father," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I've made a decision. This child is staying with me. I will raise him." Mosey blinked a few times as if he hadn't understood. His hands trembled. "Zuri, are you sure? It's a heavy burden. I've carried it alone, and I know how it can crush Amen." She looked him straight in the eyes, and for the first time in a long while there was more than pain in her gaze. There was resolve. "That's exactly why, Father, because I know what it's like to grow up without a hug, without protection, without a voice. I won't let him live what I lived, nor what Zuika suffered. Her words fell on Mossy like a bori and at the same time, like a blow. It was as if his daughter had chosen to become what he had never managed to be. In that moment, time seemed to freeze in the house. The baby began to stir, rubbing his eyes, and Zuri gently rocked him. Mosey watched, and every small act from her was like a silent lesson. He who had always believed love was weakness, now watched his daughter turn that supposed weakness into strength. Throughout the day, Zuri began to act differently. She no longer hid from the village's stares. She took the baby with her to the market, walking between stalls of vegetables and flour with her head held high. The women whispered. Themen laughed, but she didn't waver. There was something in her posture that no longer allowed those comments to wound her the same way. Those who looked closely could see what she carried in her arms wasn't shem, was dignity. The gesture of publicly claiming the child spread faster than gossip. Some quietly admired her courage. Others continued to mock, but no one could deny Zuri had chosen to turn pain into redemption. That night, father and daughter sat side by side, sharing for the first time a moment of true peace. The baby slept soundly, and Mosey, voice trembling, said, "You're stronger than I've ever been, Zuri. More just, more human. Today, you've taught me what I've spent a lifetime not learning." She didn't reply right away. She simply looked at him, and after a long pause, quietly said, "It's not about strength, father. It's about not letting the pain repeat." Those words sealed something invisible between them. The resentment that once separated them began to dissolve. Not because the past had vanished, but because the present was starting to take on a new meaning. The daughter who had once carried wounds now became the bridge, and the father, once as hard as stone, was bending to the truth. That love can grow even in the middle of a garbage heap. That single act choosing to raise the child, not as a burden, but as destiny, changed everything. It changed how Zuri saw herself. It changed the place her father held in her life. It even began to shift how the village looked at them. And more than anything, it changed the course of their family story. Resentment, shame, and rejection no longer had the final word. A simple but profound gesture from a determined daughter was enough to turn trash into the root of new life. Weeks passed, and the small mud house that once held only heavy silences now breathed life. The baby's cries, at first a cruel reminder of shame and abandonment, had become music. Each sob, each fleeting smile, each curious glance from the little one carried a piece of healing, not just for Zuri, but for Mosey as well. It was as if God had chosen that place. With its humble walls and wounded hearts to plant a new story, the village remained divided. Many still talked, laughed, and pointed fingers. Some whispered that Zuri had gone mad for taking in the child. Others said Mosey was just an old sinner trying to clean his name. But there were those whose gaze began to change. Some older women, seeing Zuri's courage, recognized in her the strength they wished they'd had in their own past. A few men, quiet, ashamed, began to regret their mockery. Little by little, the power of public judgment began to lose its grip. Inside the home, however, the transformation was unmistakable. Zuri, who had returned to the village wounded and weary, now walked with steady steps. Not because the past had vanished. The memories of rejection and absence were still there. But because for the first time she felt she had the power to write a new chapter. Holding the baby against her chest, she found in every simple gesture a silent answer to her old wounds. Mosey, too, was no longer the same man. The once harsh elder, who had believed love was weakness, now allowed himself small acts of tenderness. He hadn't become sweet or overly affectionate overnight, but there was a deep shift in his eyes. He spent more time beside his daughter, helping in quiet ways, and in his tired gaze there was something Zuri had never seen before: respect. One calm night, under a sky full of stars, Mosey approached his daughter, who was rocking the baby beside the fire. The flickering light reflected on their faces, and the silence between them, once made of hurt, was now full of meaning. "Zuri," he said, voice rough but steady, "I spent my life thinking that harshness meant honor. I lost you because of it. I lost Suika too. Today I see I was wrong. The love I denied, it's what brought us here." Zeri looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. There was no anger anymore, only a gentle pain softened by compassion. "Father, I'll never forget what I went through, but I choose not to repeat it. This child won't carry the weight of our mistakes. He'll know what we never had the courage to give." The baby stirred in her arms, letting out a soft sound, as if affirming her promise. Mosey smiled faintly, a timid, almost childlike smile, as if rediscovering a part of himself buried decades ago. Word of Zuri's decision spread through the village. Some still laughed, but others began to admire her in silence. To many, raising a child found in the trash was madness. But to a few it was proof that divine justice still lived in the world, that love could grow in even the most unlikely places. And so, without speeches or grand explanations, father and daughter found reconciliation, not through long apologies or hollow promises, but through a once-rejected baby who had become their bridge. Years of resentment were dissolved through shared care, through divided responsibility, through a love that had finally found room to bloom. The village learned reluctantly that not every shame is what it seems. Sometimes behind a heavy secret there lies a story of paint that longs for redemption. And even in life's dumpware, most see only waistguard can plant seeds of love and new beginnings. Zuri was no longer the rejected daughter, nor the woman burdened by inherited shame. She was a mother in spirit, a woman who had turned her wounds into strength. And Mosey, the feared, hardened man, now stood as an old soul who had learned too late. Perhaps, but not too late to matter that love is the only legacy worth leaving behind. In the end, the family discovered a deep truth. Pain doesn't have to pass from one generation to the next. It can be broken when someone has the courage to love. And so, in the very place where life once seemed worthless, amid scraps and flies, a quiet miracle was born. The rebirth of a family. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one. Thank you for being part of our